You think you know Snow White, the jealous stepmother, the magic mirror, 7 singing dwarves, true love's kiss. Disney sold you a sanitized bedtime story. But here's what they didn't tell you. In the Brothers Grimm's original 1812 manuscript, the woman who orders Snow White's murder isn't her stepmother at all. It's her biological mother. And when the huntsman delivers what she believes are her daughter's lungs and liver, she doesn't dispose of them. She boils them in salt and consumes them, believing she is absorbing her own child's essence. This wasn't a transcription error. This was a warning about real crimes medieval audiences would have instantly recognized. Once you understand what the glass coffin actually meant, once you see why the original villain was Snow White's actual mother, you'll realize this was never a fairy tale. It preserved patterns of real crimes in narrative form. Picture Jacob Grimm, writing by candlelight in 1812, carefully transcribing what elderly peasant women had whispered to him. On the yellowed page, preserved now in the Berlin State Library, appears the German word Die Mutter, not stepmother, simply mother. The manuscript shows no hesitation, no correction. This mother orders her huntsman to bring back her young daughter's lungs and liver as proof of death. When he delivers animal organs instead, the text states she has them boiled in salt. Then she eats them, greedily, believing she's devouring her own child's essence. This wasn't an isolated tale. Across Europe, from Russia to Ireland, ritualized consumption narratives involving mothers and daughters. Stories that emerged from very real fears about what mothers might do to daughters who threatened their position. The Grimms changed this detail in later editions, transforming the mother into a stepmother to make it publishable. But they couldn't erase what folklore scholars now recognize as the tale's true origin. A coded warning about infanticide and the very real dangers young girls faced within their own households. Medieval audiences would have understood the context immediately. In German territories where this tale originated, young noble women were political pawns. Their beauty determined their value in marriage alliances. But when a daughter's beauty surpassed her mother's, it shifted the balance of power. The mother's influence derived from her ability to broker marriages, maintain court relationships. A beautiful daughter meant competition from her own bloodline. Take Margareta von Waldeck. Bavarian court records from the 16th century document her case. At age 13, sudden wasting illness, just weeks after her betrothal to a powerful duke, a match that would have elevated her above her mother's station. Court physicians' notes discovered in monastery archives have led some historians to suspect mercury poisoning, though this remains a theory rather than confirmed fact. Her mother inherited not only Margareta's dowry, but also the right to negotiate a new alliance with the spurned duke's family. No investigation was ever conducted. The father, who stood to gain significant lands from his wife's new negotiations, declared it God's will. Such cases weren't aberrations. They were patterns whispered about in castle corridors, but never formally prosecuted. Every young noble woman knew her emerging beauty might mark her for death. The mirror wasn't magical thinking to medieval listeners. Elaborate mirrors of noble households were genuine status symbols, costing more than entire estates. They represented political power. When the mirror declares Snow White the fairest, it's not offering a compliment. It's pronouncing a death sentence, announcing a transfer of power the queen cannot accept. The huntsman is ordered to bring back Snow White's lungs and liver. Modern readers miss the devastating significance of these specific organs. In medieval German folklore, the lungs were believed to contain the breath of life, the very essence of youth. The liver housed the soul's vitality. The queen doesn't just want Snow White dead. She wants to consume the physical sources of her daughter's beauty and youth. The text states she boils them in salt, eats them, engaging in what anthropologists identify as symbolic vampirism, the belief that consuming another's organs transfers their qualities to the eater. But the queen doesn't know she's been deceived. She believes she's eaten her daughter, performs the ritual, swallows the flesh. In her mind, she has absorbed Snow White's youth and beauty, eliminated the threat forever. This wasn't fantasy to medieval audiences. This was codification of actual fears about what desperate women in positions of power might do to maintain that power. After Snow White escapes, she doesn't flee to safety. She enters servitude with 7 men in the forest. The Grimms were careful to call them dwarfs, but folklore historians have uncovered something far more disturbing. In the Hessian regions where the Grimms collected their tales, historical records from the 16th and 17th centuries document extensive use of child labor in mining operations. Children as young as 7 were sent into mines because their small bodies could navigate narrow tunnels. They were called Kleinenbergleute, literally small mountain people, which the Grimms translated as dwarfs. Imagine children no older than Snow White herself, crawling on hands and knees through passages barely wider than their shoulders. The mining archives from Siegen, dated 1618, describe boys and girls who entered the mines at 7. If they survived, they emerged permanently stunted, growth arrested by malnutrition and crushing weight, spines curved from years of crouching in 3-foot-high tunnels, skin turned the pallor of mushrooms. At night, these child miners slept in communal barracks, hidden deep in the forest. Local girls, often runaways or orphans, would keep house for these communities in exchange for protection and shelter. When Snow White arrives and immediately begins cooking and cleaning for 7 small men who work all day and return covered in grime, contemporary audiences would have recognized this arrangement instantly. The 7 dwarfs weren't magical beings. They were society's most exploited children, and Snow White had joined their ranks, trading domestic servitude for survival. The 3 murder attempts reveal an escalating pattern. First, bodice laces used to suffocate, then a poisoned comb attacking Snow White's beauty itself. The comb deserves attention because in medieval noble households, combs weren't simple grooming tools. They were intimate objects passed from mother to daughter. A mother combing her daughter's hair was a daily ritual of bonding and care. By transforming this symbol of maternal love into a weapon, the tale makes explicit the complete perversion of the mother-daughter relationship. Finally, the apple. Red on one side, white on the other. Poisoned on the red side. The queen eats the white half to prove it's safe, then watches as Snow White bites into the red portion. That apple connects to one of the most chilling aspects of the historical record. In medieval Germany, those who dealt in poisons were known to create partially poisoned fruits, sometimes called Judas fruits in some texts. Apples or fruits injected with poison on one side only, designed to kill slowly enough that the poisoner could establish an alibi. Picture a feast in a Rhineland castle, circa 1485. Servants bring forth perfect red apples gleaming in torchlight. The hostess selects one, cuts it with her own knife, eats half while offering the other to her young rival. Hours later, long after the hostess has retired with witnesses to her good health, the victim begins to convulse. Lips remain red, skin stays fresh, but her body seizes into paralysis. Court physicians find no obvious cause of death, the apple long since digested, the poisoner's alibi unshakable. The symptoms Snow White displays are consistent with concentrated belladonna extract from deadly nightshade, immediate paralysis, preservation of beauty, the appearance of death while maintaining minimal life signs. The glass coffin wasn't a fairy tale invention. Noble families across Europe actually commissioned crystal or glass-topped coffins for young women who died under suspicious circumstances, particularly when questions of inheritance were involved. Some historians argue the transparent coffin served multiple purposes. It proved the heir was truly dead, preventing claims she'd been hidden away. It displayed her beauty one final time, a morbid advertisement of the family's genetic stock, and one interpretation suggests It may have prevented close examination of the body for signs of foul play, the glass creating a barrier between the deceased and any who might question the cause of death. When Snow White lies in her crystal coffin, she joins a long line of noble daughters whose deaths enriched their families and whose bodies became public spectacles of private crimes. But the glass coffin invited something even more disturbing. In the Grimm original, Snow White isn't awakened by true love's kiss. A prince becomes fixated on what he believes is a corpse. He convinces the dwarfs to give him the glass coffin, has his servants carry it everywhere he goes. A man so obsessed with a dead girl's beauty that he needs to possess the body, to transport it, to keep it near him. This deeply disturbing fixation on a body believed to be dead reveals another danger young women faced. When the servants stumble and the jostle dislodges the apple from her throat, she awakens not from love, but from accident, after being treated as an object of obsession. Medieval audiences would have recognized this too. The danger didn't end with surviving your own family. Young women beautiful enough to attract this kind of attention faced threats from every direction. The wedding brings the tale's final revelation. The evil queen is forced to dance in red-hot iron shoes until she dies. This wasn't fantasy. This specific execution method was reserved in medieval law for one particular crime: matricide or attempted matricide. Not just capital punishment, but theatrical display, demonstrating that certain crimes violated the natural order so fundamentally that they required supernatural levels of retribution. When the evil queen faces this fate, every listener would have understood. Her crime was recognized as the most heinous possible, the destruction of one's own bloodline. The tale was granting her the justice that real mothers who murdered their daughters so rarely faced. Maria Tatar, the Harvard folklorist who spent decades studying the brothers Grimm manuscripts, discovered something extraordinary. In the margins of their working notes, the brothers had written Mahnung und Warnung, Snow White, reminder and warning. This wasn't entertainment. It was a cautionary tale, encoding real dangers that young women faced, preserving knowledge of actual crimes too horrible to speak of directly. The tale even embeds what we now recognize as intergenerational trauma. The magic mirror doesn't just reflect physical beauty, it reflects the queen's psychological state, her inability to see her daughter as anything but competition. Modern psychologists note the queen's behavior follows the pattern of malignant narcissism. The Grimms understood this centuries before psychology had a name for it. Once you understand the Grimms were encoding a warning, the smallest details take on terrifying weight. 7 dwarfs, 3 murder attempts, 1 apple divided in 2 halves. In medieval numerology, 7 represented completion. Snow White's time with the dwarfs was a complete cycle of hiding. 3 attempts matched legal precedent. Under Germanic law, 3 murder attempts elevated the crime to high treason when the victim was of noble blood. The bifurcated apple embodied the duality the tale explores. The mother who should protect but destroys. The beauty that should be celebrated but incites murder. The home that should be safe but becomes the source of greatest danger. But the most devastating detail was gradually edited out. Snow White's age. In the 1812 version, she's 7 when her mother first tries to kill her. 7. The same age children entered servitude in the mines. The same age young girls of noble birth began appearing in court records as victims of mysterious illnesses that benefited their mothers' political positions. This wasn't about a teenager threatened by vanity. This documented patterns of harm toward children that appear repeatedly in historical records, encoded and preserved in a form that could be safely transmitted through generations. The transformation into children's entertainment represents one of the most successful acts of historical erasure ever accomplished. Disney's 1937 version eliminated every warning element. The mother became unambiguously a stepmother. The dwarfs became comic figures. The prince's disturbing fixation became true love's kiss. Snow White transformed from a young abuse victim into a singing teenager. The sanitization was so complete that modern audiences have no idea they're watching a story that originally documented patterns of violence within families. Yet the darkness persists. Children instinctively recognize something wrong. They ask, why does the mother want Snow White dead? Why does she have to live with strangers? Why does the prince fall in love with someone he thinks is dead? The darkness bleeds through because it's structural to the narrative. You can't remove it without the story collapsing entirely. Beneath the glittering symbols lies a record of real dangers young women faced in medieval households, where innocence could be weaponized, where beauty could become a death sentence. The mirror, the poisoned apple, the glass coffin. These weren't playful inventions for children. They were symbols of power, control, and violence, drawn from a world where daughters were pawns in political games, and too often victims of the very mothers meant to protect them. The Grimms, trained as legal scholars, knew the court records, knew the whispered accounts, and wrapped those horrors in just enough fantasy to ensure their survival through centuries of retelling. That's why the tale endures, not because of dwarfs or romance, because its DNA carries a truth too terrible to speak plainly. The greatest threat to a child might come from within her own home. Snow White isn't a bedtime story. It's a crime scene preserved in narrative form, evidence disguised as entertainment. And once you recognize what you're really reading, the illusion collapses. The fairest of them all was never about beauty. It was about a child marked for death.